guess I need to make the change, but it was kind of like, no, it's, yeah, I'm not that I mean, I'm not even that interested for eventualities to be living out there. But perhaps we would.
These off of here. You want to take one of these? Ready to go. And you're going to need a hatchet.
I'm not going to walk around the park ever.
For another few days.
We made it. He's a ICU. Probably helps get into the travel nurse hospital. He's gonna base out our. It is. I'm kind of used to 31-year-old. Nice to meet you.
Yes.
Everything you need to know about the Thank you.
have to be like within her eyesight to see you.
Time out every day just to come and spend it with us and and share some memories, stuff that I would have never known if I hadn't met some of you, and people that I would have never met if it hadn't been for a situation like this. So, not that that's a good thing, of course, but it's a blessing for me to just see a part of Laura's life that maybe I wouldn't have gotten in contact with. So thank you all so much. And I'm gonna let my mom's gonna, she has a few words to say, and then, she'll turn it over to my dad, who has a few things to say. And then, anybody else that would like to stand up and just, add a couple of comments or say something that maybe, short, just don't feel obligated, okay? And if it's quiet, don't feel like you have to fill the void, okay? And then, we'll wind things up as we get close to 4 o'clock, and, hopefully the rest of you guys can enjoy your day, okay? So thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Laura's mom, Julia Dawson, and I'm going to see if I can make some comments without dissolving into tears, and how much it has really been wonderful for me when Laura was in the hospital, and so many of you took the trouble to come and visit her and spend some time and talk about your work together. Because most of the folks who came were people who were related to the work that she did here. And I learned all kinds of things about Laura that I hadn't known before. But most important, I learned how important she was to you and how much you respected her. And that was a wonderful thing. Laura had 2 North Stars. One of them was kindness, and the other was empathy. And she excelled in both. She was somebody who cared about people, was concerned about them. If there was anything she could do to help them with anything, she wanted to do that and did that. She cared about pets or animals, all animals. If we were out driving and she was behind the wheel and I would see up ahead there was a squash, whatever, on the road, I would say, oh, look at that over there. Isn't that interesting? So she wouldn't see the squash animal because that was always upsetting. So that may be empathy to the extreme, but that was her. She was a fabulous cook, as some of you might have known. Living alone, I don't know who else would have taken the time to make mushroom risotto for just themselves for dinner. But that was the kind of thing she did because she loved to cook. She loved art, and that was something that she and I shared for many years. She came down to Miami several times when Art Basel was there. I have a very good friend in Miami who is an art curator, very involved with the art in Miami, has her own gallery and everything, does lots of exhibitions. And she bought a lot of art from her and through her on her advice because she respected and trusted her advice, and I have done as well. So there is a lot of art in Laura's house that we are finding out what's best to do with. So if you are collectors, come and see me. Be glad to talk to you about that. So Laura was a unique person, as all of us are. And her qualities were qualities that I know many of you appreciated and respected. And I'm very happy that you were in her life.
Well, I'd like to start by thanking my son for all the things that he's done. I don't know how we would have gotten to this if it wasn't for Lee to come here and help us get through this episode. In a similar vein, about Laura as a daughter, as a sister, and some of the other parts of her life that some of you may not have been aware of. You know, you might not know this, but when she was young, she was a hell of an athlete. She ran track, she won quite a bit, especially in at the junior high level. And she loved cats. That was one of the things. She was always bringing home some poor lost cat. We would run out of names for cats. We had this one, we just called him FC. And that stood for Free Cat, Fat Cat, and a couple others. She brought home one time a Maine Coon cat. I don't know if any of you know what a Maine Coon is, but they're big cats. And this was a certifiably crazy Maine Coon. I think that cat licked himself to death. He got some kind of syndrome where he just couldn't stop, and he was always looked like he fell in a pond or something. It was really a crazy cat. One of the things that I was most proud about Laura was Laura and I had similar jobs in our career. Twice I served as special assistant or aide to senior levels of the Department of Defense and the President. And Laura did the same for the DDR&D and for the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition. And I can tell you that many a cold winter night, especially out at the farm, Laura and I would start telling, you remember the time that this happened, and before long we would literally be laughing so hard that we couldn't hardly breathe. Things like taking our high-ranking personnel to the wrong place, or losing their speech before having to make a run to go back and get it, all kinds of things like that. And also, Laura was always, as I think Julia aptly said, she was a supporter of those who needed support. She always was. And she had a vision, I think, of what our country could be. Not what it was, but what it could be in terms of racial equality, sexual equality, all of the things that make the United States that city on the shining hill that we aspire to be. And she, like many of us, struggled with recent events. Now, as a sister, she had a tough road to hoe. It was just Bill and I and her in a large part of our lives. And I've always had crazy cars. And I can remember many, many bad tricks that her brother Will pulled on her, or I pulled on her, that she used to, at the time, complain bitterly about, but after thinking back at it, laughed a lot. We used to have, I drove Morgans and Jaguars mostly in those days. And we went on quite a few trips in my old XK150, but it didn't have a top. And so we only had a tonneau cover. So the kids would be nestled down under the tonneau cover, and somebody would break wind. And Bill and I would always say it was her. she would really get upset about that. I remember one time too, on April Fool's Day, Bill and I cocked up this story. She was sleeping late, and we told her that a parrot had landed on her balcony, and that she had to get up and come out and see the parrot. She She said, well, I have to go to the bathroom first. And she went in the bathroom and we put saran wrap over the floor. She was not happy with that. Then there was Laura the farmer. I don't know, especially those of you at O&R knew how much she loved to farm. There was a point where we sold Laura half of our farm, and she went out and got a bigger tractor than my tractor. She had a huge tractor, and she could run that tractor and do the bush hogs like everybody. I mean, and she could run the snow plow. And she had, at one point, we had to have big fences around the garden area because of the deer, just anything planted. And she had real dreams of cherry trees, peach trees, and other things. And usually the deer went out. But she was a great farmer. She was also a very, very skilled businesswoman. You know, her company, Redtail LLC, had two names. One reason why she named it that was because she was so proud of the first black American pilots in World War II who flew in the Italian campaign, later in the European campaign, and they had a red tail on the plane we called the Red Tails. And one winter, just as she was starting up her company, we were over at her house, and for some reason I opened the back door, and I thought a squirrel ran in the house. And we had had lots of squirrel problems. And one especially flying squirrel that got into Laura's house, and they couldn't get it out. She had to eventually hire a professional to come. And the guy tried for about 6 weeks to catch that fly. Never caught it. So we thought, oh, flying squirrel, it would be back again. But it turned out to be a little cat. And the cat had a red tail. And it was just a tiny little kitten. I don't know where it came from, covered with fleas, totally feral, but that was Redtail. And she took that business and did very well. And that business woman side of her was something that a lot of people never saw. Then lastly, certainly not least of all, Laura was a genuine patron. She loved the Navy. She really did. The Navy became her life. When she was a teenager, she always said she wanted to be in fashion design, retail, and that's what she did. She worked from the time she was, I don't know, 15 or 16, as soon as she could get a lot from that. She worked, made her own money, bought her own car, and she was good at that. But fairly soon after she graduated from college, she shifted to national security. And she worked in the office of the Secretary of Defense. She worked at OSD level, and then she began to work with the Navy. And the Navy became her home. O&R became her home. And not only did she contribute as a true patriot to our country, but she shared that, especially with her youngest brother, sitting back here in the back from today. When he was young, he was absolutely obsessed with the story of the Titanic. And one time, Laura was hosting Robert Ballard at O&R, and she went to her bosses and asked, would it be okay if I could bring my little brother to meet Robert? And she brought Patrick in to meet him. And he came home that day and he said, Dad, this is best day of my whole life. Not Christmas, not his birthday, the day he met Robert Bell. He would have never, ever had a chance to do that. I had met Robert Bell many times as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, but I didn't have that little thing that his mother talked about, which was that empathy, to think through, geez, I don't really see him meet Robert Bell. But Laura, she thought that, and she was. So I just want to conclude my little part by adding to what William and Julia said. Thank you all for coming. We love you all. We appreciate you sharing this day with us. This is where Laura loved to walk. Even in days when she was really depressed, sometimes she and I would come over here and we would walk around through the gardens, and she knew most of the plants. To me, I just knew they mostly by the color of the flowers. But she could tell me exactly what they were, and it was a place of peace for her. So that's what I decided to have. So if anybody wants to say anything, you can hear one of our colleagues.
I'll say something.
You want to say something? Okay. This is our stepmom.
I think most of you here know me. In fact, after telling everybody, my oldest friend, not my oldest in the age, but the oldest term being my friend, is my best friend Dreamus here, and we've been friends for 40 years. My story is that I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Laura. Hardly. It was 1985. I had been working in retail, and I decided I wanted a more glamorous retail job, and there's this store called Alcon Andrews down in Torrington, Pennsylvania, and they had the most beautiful women's clothing. So I went down there, interviewed, got the job, and I showed up for work, and there was Laura. And this is when Laura had a pixie haircut, if you can imagine it. There's one or two pictures over there. But she had real short hair. That was the only time she ever had it. She grew it out and never would get it cut again. But I met Laura, and, I worked with her and everything. It was no big deal. But it seems as though her father was working down at the White House on the National Security Council staff. And I don't think she told me at the time. Nothing occurred to me. But one day, somebody said, "Oh, Laura's dad's here." And all I remember was a tall man in a suit with a briefcase. And I might have said hello or something as I walked by, but I don't think we introduced ourselves or nothing happened. So several days later, Laura came up to me, and I don't know, interesting question for you. And I'm like, okay. She said, "You remember my dad was here like last week or whatever?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." She said, "I've never done this before, but would you be interested in going out with him?" And I said, "Really? Well, tell me about it." Because like I said, I wouldn't have known him from anybody. I didn't know if we'd ever even looked at each other. And she told me, he was a lieutenant, colonel in the Air Force, and he was working on the National Security Council staff, and whatever. And I said, "Oh, okay, well, yeah, sure, give him." And I said, "Well, how old is he?" And she told me. And I said, "Well, give him my number." "Yeah, sure, I'll go out." So time passed, I never heard anything, whatever, maybe several weeks or whatever. Finally, I was home on my day off, and the phone rang, and he said, "Hi, this is John Douglas." And I said, "Well, what happened to you?" He said, "Oh, I was busy working, and I worked at the White House, and I'm never here, and I said, "Okay." He said, "Do you want to go on a tour of the White House in the old building?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that'd be wonderful." He said, "We could go out to dinner afterwards." And I said, "Okay." So he said, "I'll come pick you up." And I said, "Okay, that's fine." And he said, "I need to have your birth date." And at that point in time, of course, they had to know, my birthday, and year I was born and everything, to be able to get, go through security and get into the White House. So I told him April 24th, 1957. He said, "Okay." So he comes and picks me up in a convertible, a giant convertible. It was like an Oldsmobile or something. It was like a boat. It was huge, old, from the 70s. Okay. Top down, of course, and it was April, so it was okay. And said to be very proud of himself. He's like, oh, look at this. This is, you know, and I said, well, thank you, that's really great. And I opened up the card and I looked at him and I said, I think I probably need to tell you what kind of crap. Which of course he was too. But, and so that was the beginning, and that was, you know, April 24th, 1985. And so then, you know, 7 years later, well, 7 years later, no, 9 years later. No, that was 1987, I'm sorry, 1987. 7 years later, we got married, and Laura was one of my bridesmaids, and in her Civil War ball gown, the pictures are over there. And then she was there for the birth of both of her brothers, Alex and Patrick. And we farmed a million times, spent a lot of times in our overalls. We cooked a million meals. We canned tomatoes, and all salsa and everything else. We shoveled a lot of snow. We cut up a lot of logs with a log splitter. We had an extraordinary time together.
Made pickles.
We made pickles, made great pickles. We baked tons of Christmas cookies. I think probably some of you have had Christmas cookies. And so we had, you know, a wonderful 38 years together. I feel very blessed.
What age was her?